Shabbat Shalom, brothers and sisters. This is the Torah Effects. I'm Moreh, Rapha'Yah. Welcome once again in this Shabbat Shalom. We're going to talk about a little bit about this parasha, this Torah portion, which is, I believe this is one of the Torah portions that really open our minds. And the reason why I say that is because this has a lot to do with us, believe it or not, in everyday life, how we can put the Torah to the test. And that is one of the reasons why we study the Torah. It's not just to study the Torah just for the heck of it, just to gain knowledge, but to put it to action. And that's what this Torah portion is all about. So let's jump into it. Shabbat Shalom to everyone who's watching right now and who will watch it a little bit later. Let's switch into what I want to bring. It won't take too long, but it will get right to the point. This parasha, Wayetze, which means, and he went out. This parasha basically talks about our father Yaakov when he went out from Beersheba, from his father's house, and he went out to the north to look for, apparently, for a wife. But let me just pause here just for a few moments. There is a gap there that we need to acknowledge. There is a gap of time that we need to acknowledge from point A to point B. This is actually point B and C. And the reason why I say that is because the way we've been learning for so long, we think that from the moment that our father Yaakov left his father's house, which is Yitzhak, and fleeing from his brothers because he wanted to kill him, he left right on to the north to look for a wife and at the same time flee from his brother's wrath. But in reality, we have to think and we have to search a little bit more, that there is more to what they've been telling us for a long time, or more what the Torah says, but there is more details, and those details are very important for us to gain. Now let's switch back again. This parashat or Torah portion number 7, Genesis or Bereshit chapter 28 verse 10 to 32 verse 3. Look at what it says. Yaakov Wayetze. Wayetze means he left from Beersheba and traveled to Haran. Now, once again, it was from point A to point B. That's what the Torah says. From this moment, we know something happened. There had to be something that happened. But once again, we need to acknowledge a backstory before we get here. And that's what we need to trace back, few steps back, so we can know what's going on here. And that, as we acknowledged last week on the sequence of Torah portions, we understood what Yaakov did to his brother, or what causes this to happen. And this was to make sure that lineage of the priesthood would not be lost. First of all, he gained the birthright. That's the first one. And the second thing that he did, which is literally attached one to another, which was the blessing, his father's blessing, which is the Birkat Kohanim, which is the priestly blessing, which have to have it. Remember, if Esau would have obtained that blessing and that birthright, the Torah would not continue, period. Why? Because in that blessing and that birthright has a lot to do how to serve Yahweh, which the lineage from the very beginning. Adam had it, pass it on to Shem. Shem pass it on to Abraham. Abraham pass it on to who? To Yitzhak. And Yitzhak needed to pass it on to someone who needed to have that it factor. That F factor was the will to follow Torah, the will to serve Yahweh with the most heart. But in the case of Esau, he did not have that. he had the opposite of what Yahweh is looking for, which is a willing heart. Esau was completely, totally different from Jacob. If you notice, and let's jump into it, now we are going to see a few things that we need to acknowledge so we know those details are very, very important. So let's continue. 28 verse 10, Yaakov Wayetze. Let's look at another version of it. He appeared to Beersheba in trouble to Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. He took the stones from the place, put them under his head, and laid them down to sleep, to sleep. Now, we have to understand something very important. There is a factor there that we need to acknowledge, and that factor is basically the factor that he left for a reason. That reason here in this very beginning of this Torah portion is where he set out to the north to look for a wife. To look for a wife. And we have to understand this. If we trace it back a few Torah portions behind, remember that Yitzhak, it wasn't him, but it was his father's will, which is Abraham, to send his servant Eliezer to look for a wife, which is the same place where Yaakov is heading to, which is the north, which is Haran, which is Lavan. We have to acknowledge something very important in this gap, this portion of time, which in the case of Yitzhak, the servant went to look for a wife. But if you guys remember, we talked about how he brought gifts, he brought money. He needed to purchase this wife because it was the custom back in the day to arrange the marriage, but at the same time, the groom needed to purchase literally the wife, and that's what we see in the previous Torah portions. Now, in the case of Yaakov, something happened that we need to acknowledge, that we need to search for. Let's continue. If you notice down here, let me point it out with a laser, here in the below, where in the future Jerusalem was, that's Beersheba. That's where he took off to the north, all the way to Haran. That's a long way. It wasn't like an hour or 2-hour drive. Especially there was no car, there was camels, and in the case of Israel, it was a donkey, okay? A chamor in donkey. So let's continue. But before that, I wanted you to acknowledge something very important. The birthright that Yitzhak has given to Esau, because of obviously he was the firstborn, that belonged to him, to Esau. But remember that he completely rejected his birthright. And we have to understand something very important. Birthright, back in our father's time, back in the day, it was something very, very important. It wasn't something to be taken lightly. In the case of Esau, he didn't really put much attention to his birthright because the things of the secular world was more important than the things of Yahweh's kingdom. So what happened? Remember that the incident last week, Yaakov purchased Esau's right. So to whom belonged to birthright? It belonged to Yaakov. Esau knew it that he could not obtain that birthright. Why? Let me pause here for a moment. Because remember that we looked into the book of Yasher and also other sources where Esau literally sold his birthright for a bowl of lentils. That was the transaction that both did. But Yaakov, knowing that this birthright was very, very important. Now the question once again, and I ask you so you guys remember a little bit, where did he get this information that the birthright was very, very important? He got it from his father. He got it from his I should say his grandfather, which was Abraham. He got it from even his great-grandfather, which is Shem. We have to understand that, remember that Shem was Melchizedek. He was the priestly bride for the priest to continue that lineage, but he needed to be the firstborn. In the case of Yaakov, he did not have that. Esau did. But remember, Esau did not want to continue that lineage, which is Yahweh's. He wanted to do something more like in the secular world, but nothing about Yahweh's kingdom. Now let's continue. And we're going to see some similarities here, that because Esau obtained the birthright, look at what he did later with his sons. Yaakov became Israel, right? So when he went to Egypt with the 75 souls, including Joseph's, right? Remember that Joseph have about 9 kids. Okay, and that will be for another time, for another video. But the first two kids was the birthright. Firstborn was Manasseh. He had the birthright. But remember, Ephraim was the second. But what is it that Yaakov did, or Israel did? He did the same thing as he did with his brother. He switched that birthright. And who did he give it to? He gave it to his younger son, which is Ephraim. So that birthright belonged to Ephraim. Now, I do want to make a little parenthesis here, and I do want to acknowledge something that you might not know or you might not realize, and that is that you and I, Ephraim, the house of Israel, the northern kingdom, we have so much to give to Yahweh. We have so much to acknowledge what we don't really realize, that we have the birthright. Remember that the firstborn had the double portion. The firstborn had the birthright, and also that double portion today is the double chodmah, which means the double understanding of the Torah. You have to understand that because of Mashiach, we have that right, but we don't, or we do not realize that we do have it. I want you to understand today that you do have the birthright. Yehudah, or our Jewish brothers, do not have the birthright. Okay, they have the scepter, they have the rod, but they don't have the authority anymore. Guess who have it? Mashiach has it. When the first century, when he came, the Torah speaks that the scepter do not depart from Judah. That's what the book of Numbers talks about. But until the Mashiach comes, which he came, the first event in the first century, then the Mashiach took this scepter, the authority. Now, guess what? Our Jewish brothers do not have their scepter, nor have their birthright. We have it. So I want you to understand, and I want you to acknowledge something very important. Today, we have so much to give to Yahweh. We do not realize that. We need to have that privilege awakened. We need to have that understanding that because of Mashiach, we have so much to give, but we need to acknowledge that because we have so much to give to Yahweh. Let's continue. Genesis 28 verse 1. So Yitzhak summoned Yaakov, and after blessing him, commanded him, thou shalt not choose a wife from among the Hittite women. Go to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and choose a wife from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. Now, this is something that Yitzhak commanded Yaakov. That blessing that he gave it to him afterwards, he summoned him, he called him up, and he commanded him. See, you have to understand something, that I think we ought to learn. And this is to listen to our elders, to listen to our fathers, to listen to our mothers' wisdom. In the case of Yitzhak, he commanded his brother, his son, Yaakov, to not to choose any secular woman, someone who would stray him from the path of Yahweh. In the case of Esau, he did the opposite. He went on and married all different kinds, different places, different nations. That's why today the mixture of Esau's is Rome, it's India, it's basically Palestine, and another time we will talk about the Nephilim. He was mixed with that too, but that will be another time in another video. But I want you to understand something. He did the opposite of what his father commanded, which is follow Torah, follow what Yahweh has given us, which is the Torah, and not to give it to the nations as far as to trample on it, to step on it. And the way Esau did was the opposite of his father's command. Now in the case of Yaakov, he listened to him. You have to understand something. The word for listen in Hebrew is Shema. That's why when we recite the Shema every day, Shema Yisrael Yahweh Borenu Yahweh Echad. Listen, Yisrael, Yahweh our Creator, Yahweh is one. Why? Because when we listen, or Shema is not only to listen, but also to obey Yahweh's command. And it's very important for us to understand that if we listen to Yahweh, there is a reason why. It's because there is a blessing. In the case of Yaakov, he listened to him and he went to the north. So it is something that we need to learn from our forefathers. I think it's very important what Yitzhak did, summon his son to do something that they needed to be done. Otherwise, the lineage would end up in death. Plain and simple. Let's continue. Genesis 28 verse 3. May Ayil Shaddai bless you, make you fruitful, and multiply your Sarah or your generation until you become total Kachal. Kachal means assembly of peoples. And exactly what's happening right now. Right now, it's basically this very verse that you guys are reading in this very moment is actually fulfilling in this day and age, in this very last generation. Why did I say that? Is because there is a lot of kehilas, a lot of synagogues, there's a lot of assemblies that are opening. But the kachal is not just this, the enclosement or the place where they gather, but it's actually of peoples. There are more people that are becoming to the Hebrew roots, and we need to understand that. That's why it's very important for you and I to learn Torah, because it's not just for us to keep it to ourselves, but to put it into action. And that action is to spread it among the nations, spread it to Ephraim, spread it to the northern kingdom. Let's continue. So the word kachal means to gather, congregation, assembly, or gather of people. This is very important because this kachal, see, a lot of people tend to think nowadays, especially in the Christian world, in the Catholic and so forth, on the Protestants, that they think that Mashiach came in the first century to make a church, quote unquote. That's not accurate. That's not true. Kachal or kechila or church, what they call it outside, it wasn't invented in the first century. Our people are becoming from very traces back to the time of our forefathers. We see a plain evidence here that kachal means a synagogue, an assembly. And once again, it's not the enclosement, it's not the actual place, but the people. That's what it is. Let's continue. Let's go into the source of book of Yasher 28 verse 17. And after this, Shelach, the son of Asparchat, died in that year, which is the 18th year of the lives of Yaakov and Esau. All the days that Shelach lived were 433 years, and she died. Now, we have to understand something very important. Our forefathers learned Torah from the early age. This is not something likely for us to okay, that's very nice and so forth. No, we have to understand that our forefathers literally learned Torah. In the case of Esau, I want you to see something from two perspectives. In the perspective of Yaakov and also in the perspective of Esau. Let me switch here. Verse 18. At the time Yitzhak sent his youngest son, Yaakov, to where? To the house of Shem and Heber. What happened? He learned the Torah instructions from where? From Yahweh. And Yaakov stayed there in the house of Shem and Heber. How many years, brothers and sisters? 32 years learning Torah. And Esau, his brother, did not go because he was not willing to go. And he stayed in his father's house in the land of Canaan. Now, we are seeing two different lives. Remember this, as we mentioned last week, they were twins. They literally look alike. Of course, they were twins, they were replicas. The only difference is one was more hair than the other one. One was more reddish than the other one. That was the only difference. But their characters are completely night and day. Completely. Why? Because one wanted to learn Torah. Wanted to be in the house of Shem and Heber. Remember that Shem is who? Is Melchizedek. Heber that's his son. But how many years? 32 years. Stay there learning Torah. No wonder why he acknowledged the birthright. No wonder why he obeyed his father's Yitzhak. No wonder why he was very lenient to that path of Yahweh. I truly believe that we need to learn a lot from our forefathers. We need to acknowledge our forefathers' path. I believe that today that is completely lost. And the reason for it is because the way they've been teaching us for a long time is basically Roman Greco mind, which is very sad, to be honest with you. But we should learn from our forefathers how they learned Torah, not very short, but for a long time Torah. And now in the case of Esau, he rather stay with his father's house. He rather be in the field. He rather be outside partying around. Today we can put that on the perspective. You met a lot of people, they rather not learn the Torah, not learn the things of our forefathers, not learn the true Messiah, the true Mashiach, but they rather be partying around, drinking, doing drugs, and doing all kinds of stuff. The opposite of what Yahweh says, don't do it. So it's something that we see the 90 day here, a totally different contrast of what the Torah speaks about. So let's continue. 28 verse 25, and when Shem died, who is Shem? Melchizedek. Remember that he died of 600 years of his life. Yaakov returned to his fathers, to Hebron, which is in the land where? Of Canaan. Now, why did he return? Because he needed to see his father and mother after 32 years. Now, verse 26, in the 60 years of Yaakov's life, the people came from Haran, and Rivka was told about his brother Laban. Remember, that's his uncle, Yaakov's uncle, son of Bethuel, for Laban's wife was barren in those days and had no children. And not all her maid servants gave her any, which means that we have to understand something. Neither one of them could bear any kids. And I always believe that there is always a curse those who break the commandments of Yahweh. In the case of remember that Laban was a wizard. Okay, we can see it later. We will see it a little bit later in the future Torah portions. But Laban wasn't just anyone. He was a practitioner of the magic arts. He was literally a wizard. And he knew how to put a spell. And later on we will see how the contrast or the relationship with Jacob. But if you notice here how he wanted to have children, but he couldn't bear because the wife could not bear. That gives us the momentum that, remember something that I do want to mention before I forget, which is that is the lineage of Shem, Laban and his wife. But remember this, Yahweh needs to continue that lineage from the lineage of Shem. And the reason why is because our Mashiach needed to come from that lineage. Who came from that lineage? It was Rivka. Who was Rivka? We saw it in the previous Torah portions. She was someone tzaddik. She was someone righteous. Very important. Let's continue. Verse 28, and Yahweh afterwards remembered Adinah, Laban's wife, and she conceived and bore twin daughters, and Laban called the name of his daughter, the name of the great, which is the oldest, Leah, and the name of the youngest, Rachel. You see that? So now we getting a little bit about the picture of these two daughters of Laban's, which they happen to be twins. They were twins. No wonder happened what happened with Jacob. No wonder what we'll see a little bit later what happened to the situation what Laban did with Jacob's wedding, right? We will see it a little bit later. Now let's continue. In the case of Rachel, Rachel was a very beautiful woman. In the case of Leah, if you know, the Torah speaks about that her eyes were very kind of sad, very down. And the reason for it is because we have sources that speaks about that Leah was always sad, was always crying. Have you noticed people that are always crying? How do they look? The eyes don't look very, steady. They always look very sad, very watery, right? And that's what happened to Leah. She was always crying, but there is always a reason for it. What was the reason? The reason why is because, remember, this was a wedding arrangement. They were twins, right? The daughters were twins. Guess who were the other twins? It was Yaakov and what else? Who else? Esau. That was a marriage arrangement. That marriage arrangement supposed to be quote unquote, supposed to be Esau and Leah, and supposed to be Yaakov and Rachel. So what happened? Leah was crying all the time because she did not want to marry Esau. She always thought that Esau was somebody who was not fit for her. She knew that Esau wanted to, what else? To stray from the path of Yahweh. That's one of the reasons why she was always crying. In the case of Rachel, she was always very, very happy. She was very, very beautiful. And that's one of the reasons why Yaakov fell in love with Rachel. So now we have a backstory of these two twin daughters. Let's continue. Chapter 28, verse 41 of Genesis, Esau hated his brother because of the blessing his father had given him. Esau said to himself, the time to mourn for a father will soon come, and then I will kill my brother Jacob. Now, I want you to understand, and as I mentioned previous Torah portion, the length of Yitzhak's lifespan was not that he gave his blessing and then he died. No, he thought that he was about to die soon, but that was not the case. I think he lived like about 50 to 60 more years. That's a whole lot of time. No wonder what we're gonna see when Jacob left and came back again, and his father was still alive. and that gives you the understanding why his father gave his blessing, but why Esau, thinking that he was about to die and was going to kill his brother, that was not the case. Did not happen in that moment. Okay, so I want you to understand that. Let's continue. 27 verse 42 of Genesis. But the words of Esau, her eldest son, were reported to who? To the mother, Rivkah. She sent for Yaakov, the youngest son, and said, look, your brother Esau is threatened to kill you. Now, as we already know, gossip is always going to be around. It was so in back in the day, it is now, and it will happen again. It's always the lashon hara, it's always the gossip, right? Always the murmuring, always the whispering, right? In this case, somebody went and told Rivkah that, of course, Esau was blabbering everywhere, and she heard from someone who reported her that he wanted to kill him, to Yaakov. And guess what she did? And there is, once again, there is a gap of time that happened there. And let's see what that gap of time was. Yashar 29 verse 11, and Yaakov was very afraid of his brother Esau, and he got up and fled to where? He did not flee all the way north to Laban's house. He fled to where? To Heber, son of Shem. And he hid himself there because of his brother. And Yaakov was how old? Was 63 years old when he left the land of Canaan from Hebron. And Yaakov was hidden in that house how many years? 14 years. Remember, he was 63. He was not 21, okay? He was very advancing years. 63, and he stayed there where? In Heber's. Remember that at that time, Shem already have died. Whose Shem is Melchizedek. Then his son, Heber, was there. Remember that Heber also followed Torah. He continued learning Torah with Heber 14 years more because of his brother Esau, and he there continued to learn what? The ways of Yahweh and his mitzvot, which is the commandments. Now, it's very piece of information that we're learning right now in this very moment, that we are looking at this gap of time. This 14 years gap is exactly 14 years that he's going to serve where? In his uncle's land, where he is going to be at. I want you to understand something. What it is, it will be, again, something that happens to us is going to reflect in the future. In the case of Yaakov, he was learning Torah for 14 years, but what happened when he went to his uncle's place, his uncle's house? He put what he learned with Heber and Shem, he put it to work. He put it into action. Where? In foreign land, with the Goyim, with the nations, with somebody who's a Gentile. I truly believe that you and I have to learn something from this Torah portion. And that's what I called it, learning Torah and put it into action. It is not just to obtain knowledge. It's not to always do it, the searching and learning Torah all the time. But you and I need to put the Torah to action. What's the point of learning Torah if you don't put it to action? It doesn't make any sense. We need to walk to walk and talk to talk. We need to put it into action. No wonder why Shaul or Paul says that faith without works is dead. See, faith is about learning Torah, about continue the path. Because remember, faith is not even the right word. The word is emunah. Emunah means to have fidelity, to steadiness, to continue following Torah, and deeds are where you place what you have learned. So it goes hand in hand all the time, and that's what Yaakov was doing. Now let's continue. Yashar 29 verse 14 and 15 and 16. And the wives of Esau trouble to provoke Yitzhak and Rechab by their works, because they did not walk to the ways of Yahweh, but served their fathers Elohim, or gods or demons of wood and stone, as their father had taught them. They were more wicked than their father, and they went according to the evil desires of their hearts, and they did sacrifice and burn incense to Baalim, to their lords, in other words. And Yitzhak and Rivkah grew weary of them. And Rivkah said, I am weary of my life for the daughters of Chet. If Yaakov takes a wife of the daughters of Chet, such as these are of the daughters of the earth, what good is life to me? In other words, why am I still alive? I'd rather die. And that's one of the reasons why Rivkah sent his son to the north, because he needed to continue that lineage, that priestly lineage, learning Torah and practicing. Otherwise, it was going to die with idolatry. In idolatry, the only way to continue that idolatry is to death. One of the greatest sins of Yahweh's. Now, one of the things that Yahweh hates the most, which is idolatry. What happened to our forefathers when in the golden calf? They sinned because of idolatry. So it's something that we need to learn here in this situation. So totally different Yaakov from his brother Esau. Let's continue. Book of Yashar 29 verse 20. And after 14 years of Yaakov residing in the Heber's house, Yaakov longed to see his father and mother. And Yaakov came to his father and mother in Hebron, and Esau had forgotten in those days what Yaakov had done to him for taking his blessing. Now, something that I think we need all to acknowledge. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes time helps us to heal. It helps us to change things around, and there's always change every time time comes into our lives. In that 14-year gap, that was a wound that was healing little by little, but it was about to be awakened again. Because remember, Esau said, when my father dies, his father is not dead, but he hasn't forgotten. He's going to forget, and we're still going to remember, but we're going to see that later. Now let's continue. Verse 24, and Yitzhak called Yaakov and said to him, do not take the wives and the daughters of Canaan, for this is what our father Abraham, you see that? From father to father. First, what is our father Abraham commanded us, not me, us, according to the word of Yahweh, which he had commanded him, saying, to your seed I will give this land. If your children keep my covenant that I have made with you, then I will also fulfill your children what I have spoken to you, and not forsake them. See, this is something that has a lot to do with the covenant. That covenant our father Abraham made with the splitting of the sacrifice, right? That was the covenant that Yahweh made with our father Abraham that night. So that covenant needed to continue with every generation. So when it comes to Yitzhak, he's reminding his son Yaakov that covenant, that promise, not to break it. And exactly what Yaakov is doing. He's listening to his father. He's listening to his grandfather, Abraham. He's listening to great-great-grandfather, which is Shem, Melchizedek. You see the pattern here? Something very important. Let's continue. Verse 30, and Yitzhak finished sending Yaakov, blessing him. And what is it that he gave him besides giving the blessing? He gave him many gifts, along with silver and gold, and sent him away. And Yaakov listened to his father and mother. Do you see that? He listened, he obeyed them. And he kissed them and got up and went to where? Padan Aram. And Yaakov was 77 years old when he left the land of Canaan of Beersheba. You see that? So we see two very important things. First one is that he listened to his father and mother. He obeyed them. Second, he basically left wealthy. Not because of him, but his fathers commanded him. In another reason why he sent him away is because he needed to have a wife. That wife needed to be purchased. Remember what we talked about earlier? He needed to purchase that wife. That's one of the reasons. We're going to see in a minute why he needed to bring up that gold and gifts, because it happened previously with Yitzhak himself. So here he's heading north now, and something happened in between that journey. So I want you to see that. Verse 38, and Yahweh caused Yaakov to find chesed, or favor, in the sight of Eliphaz, son of Esau, and his men, and they heard the voice of Yaakov and did not kill him. Eliphaz and his men took all that belonged to Yaakov, along with what? With the silver and gold that he had brought with him from Beersheba, and did not leave him what? Anything. Do you see that? So basically what we see here is that he was broke, plain and simple. Where was he coming from? He was coming from his father's house. He was heading north. He was going to Laban's house. But what happened in between it? Remember what I said earlier? That his brother still hasn't forgotten what his brother did. So who is he sending to kill Yaakov? His son Eliphaz. So he was a very good, arch. Okay, he was a hunter too, just like his father. But he sent him to the north, and he was ready to murder him, to slay him. But what happened in between? Yahweh caused to have chesed, favor, in the eyes of Eliphaz. There's another reason I want you to understand. Remember that they look alike. His father, Eliphaz's father, which is Esau, and also his uncle, which is Yaakov. So both of them looked so much. So when Eliphaz was looking at Yaakov, it's almost like looking at his father. That is another reason why he caused him to forgive him and let him go completely broke. But he took all the gold, he took all the gifts that the father, Yitzhak, has given him. So you see the thing, how everything goes around? That is one of the reasons why Yaakov wind up on Laban's house completely broke with nothing. Why do you think he worked 14 years? 7 years for one and 7 years for another? Total 22 years. Now we understand why. Now we understand why he completely was with nothing. And we're going to see something very important, because remember, he's in his journey heading north, but he needed to pit stop somewhere. And this is what we're going to see that right now. Once again, you guys see the map here, right down here where the laser is at. He's heading north, but in between it, that's why he got jumped. That's why he got robbed by his nephew. Do you believe that? His nephew robbed him. And when he completely was with nothing, he went north. But before he went straight to Adam, which is, Haran, which is his uncle Laban, he stood by Bethel. Bethel is basically the Mount Moriah. And this is what happened. I want you to see something very important, because here is something that he's making a promise to Yahweh. He did not realize where he was, but now we will see it. 20 verse 11, and he came to a place and slept there, and the sun had set, and took the stones to the place, or the place, and put them under his head, and slept in that place. You see that how many times? You see the place here? Right here, the first one, second, and third. I want you to understand something that is always encoded in the Torah. Every time you see little details, little anomalies like this, there is always a reason why. There's something encoded in the Torah that Yahweh wants to tell you and wants to tell me. In this case, something encoded with that place. What that place was, we don't know, but we need to search for it. That place in Mountain Moreh, aka Bethel, is basically the future Beit HaMikdash, or the future temple. But before that, I want you to acknowledge something very important. Every time you guys see, for example, the word luz, which is about to see it right now, don't think it's Spanish. The word luz is basically a Hebrew word which means a nut, like a almond nut, which is going to be another Torah in another video. But I just want you to heads up what's coming soon. Yashar 31 verse 11, and Yaakov went out on his way to Haran and came to Mount Moriah and remained there all night near the city of Luz, okay, what I just said earlier. And Yahweh appeared there to Yaakov that night. And he said to him, I am Yahweh Ayil, Almighty of Abraham, the Ayil, Almighty of Yitzhak your father, the land which I give you and your seed. You see that? He had that vision on that very night. That Mount Moriah happens to be the future temple. Okay? The future temple, which is super, super important. Let's go into the Aramaic version of this verse, Targum Jonathan 28 verse 11. And he prayed there in that place of Beit HaMikdash. You see that? And he stayed there because the sun had gone down, and he took 4 stones from that place, Kadosh, and laid down his pillow and slept in that hut. Now, once again, we're looking at various sources here that is basically yielding to the temple, the future temple. Now, let's go into another place. You see this here? Let's read all these verses, and it's always choosing a place. Deuteronomy 16:16, the place of his choosing. Genesis 22 verse 4, the place in the distance. Jeremiah 17:12, our place Kadosh, or set apart. Exodus 33 verse 11, there was a place near me. So all these places that we are looking at is basically Yahweh's place, which is the future Beit HaMikdash, or the house of prayer, or temple, whatever you want to call it. But the point here is that where he's at, he doesn't realize that's a portal. That portal is to Yahweh's kingdom, or place, or his throne, in other words. I want you to understand something very important. There's another portal besides that one. And I want you to notice this, which is coming soon. The word sulam, which is the ladder, it yields with the alphanumeric in the Hebrew, which is 130. But Sinai is basically the alphanumeric on Hebrew is 130. Both are yielding that these two places, the Beit HaMikdash and the Sinai mountain, are two portals to Yahweh. Why? Because Yahweh chose these two places where he was going to basically come down. We see it on the coming feast of Shavuot, or the feast of the weeks, which is coming like less than 2 weeks, and also in the temple, the future temple, where the kabot, or the steam of Yahweh, came down. So like I said, it's all related to one another. Two portals. Genesis 20 verse 20 and 21, Yaakov made his vow, if Yahweh Ayil, Almighty, is with me, keeps me from the path that I'm traveling, where? To Laban, giving me lechem, love, or food, and to eat, and clothes to wear, so that I may return to my father's house in shalom, then Yahweh will be my Ayil Almighty. Now, I want you to understand something that he's actually mentioning here, which is lechem, which is bread, right? And also clothes. Now, why? The question is, we know why, right? why is he asking for clothes and for food? Remember that he just got robbed. He just literally got robbed by his nephew. He forgave his life, he let him go, and he spared his life. Okay, fine. But here's asking for basically not only for food or clothes, but also Torah. Not to wear down on Torah, but the opposite, to always learn Torah and always exercise the Torah. It's not just learning. It's not just learning, but exercise it. Put it to work. And that's what he's asking here. Once again, he just got robbed. That's why he's asking all this. To fulfill what Yahweh has given to his fathers, now he's making a vow for himself to fulfill it later. 29 verse 1, and Jacob began and went to the land of the east to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Aramee, the brother of Ribkah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. Now the reason why I bring this very verse is because if you guys look at in red, Bethuel the Aramee, remember what we learned last week? Laban also was Aramee. If we flip those two, that word Aramee, which means Laban the Aramee, which you put it or flip the word, is basically Ramai. Ramai means the deceiver. They were well known to be deceivers. They were well known to be tricksters. They were well known to deceive people. In the case of Laban, he was just ready to take advantage of his nephew, which is who? The one heading north, which is Jacob. And that's one of the reasons we're going to see next, which is we're about to finish. So now that he's arriving, or he's heading north, all the way north to Param-Aram, which is in the land of Haran, now we're going to see why. 29 verse 10, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well and gave him the sheep of Laban, his mother's brothers, to drink. And Jacob kissed Rachel and cried with loud voice, and what else? And wept. Now, why do you think he did all that? He did, of course, he helped them for the sheep and everything, but why did he cry? Why did he out loud his voice? Because he was becoming broke. He didn't know what to do. He's supposed to come with bearing gifts and buying his wife so he can come home. But it was the other way around. He was just ready to be taken advantage of. But not Rachel, but his father Laban. And that's what we're going to see next. 30 verse 9 of the book of Yasher. Jacob told Rachel that he was the son of Rachel, his father's sister. Rachel ran and told her father, which is who? Laban. And Jacob continued to cry. You see that? Because he had what? Nothing. You see that? With him to take to Laban's house. Why? Once again, is because he needed to purchase his wife. Now, why I keep mentioning the word purchase is because we have to realize that is a foreshadow of Mashiach. He purchased us with his blood. Yahushua, our Mashiach, he did that on the cross, in the post. He did that for all of us, for Israel around the world. So no wonder why we see little pieces here and there, how you're always foreshadowing our Mashiach. In this case, we see that is basically a foreshadow of our Mashiach. 29 verse 3 of Genesis. When Laban heard the news of his sister's son Jacob, he ran to meet him, hugged him, and kissed him, and brought him home. Jacob told everything that had happened. You see that? What was everything? That he got robbed by his nephew, that he was fleeing from his brother's wrath. You see that? And so forth. Now we know the reason why Laban took advantage of him. All the information that he was listening to from his Jacob's perspective, he was about to take advantage. That information was going to use for his advantage, so he can take advantage of his nephew basically for the next years. Verse 29, 24, 29 of Genesis, Rivka had his brother called Laban and ran outside to the man who was at the fountain. Now, the reason why I backtrack this verse is because I want you to understand how Laban's character was. He ran outside because he knew there was gifts, there were money coming to the house. He knew that this is going to be really good. In the case of Rivka, remember that Rivka, he was purchased by Eliezer. Well, Eliezer came and brought the money, but in reality, his father Abraham wanted to buy, which is Rivka's hand, to bring it to Yitzhak. You see that? So that's why he went outside, because he knew there was money coming. That's why he went outside. Look at what he says, 21st word. When he saw, you see that? The hoop and the bracelets on his sister's hands, at the same time, when he heard the words of the sister's Rivka saying, Thus has that man spoken to me, he approached the man who was still standing with the camels by the spring. Now he knew that this arrangement was coming, and he knew there were gifts and money coming to the house. Yashar 30 verse 11. Yaakov related to Laban his brother Esau had done to him. You see that? With, of course, his son Eliphaz, and what his son Eliphaz had done to him on the way. So all this information, once again, was about to be used in Laban's advantage. 29 verse 15 of Genesis, Laban said to him, why should you work for me for nothing? Just because you're my kinsman? Tell me how much I owe you. See, all this, it seems very fair, it seems very just, it seems very outright, but in reality, all these words were to deceive Yaakov all these years. And he did indeed. 29 verse 18 of Genesis, Yaakov had fallen in love with Rachel and said, I will work for you 7 years in exchange for Rachel, your youngest daughter. So now he's hooked. Now he needed to do something, and that something was to work for those 7 years again. But remember what happened. That Rachel did not become Rachel, it became Leah. 29 verse 21 of Genesis, and Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, since my time is up, so that I can begin to live with her. Laban called together all the men of the place and gave a marriage feast. In that night he took his daughter's Leah and brought it to Jacob, and went and sleep with her. And Laban also gave the slave or the servant Silpah to his daughter's Leah's bed, her slave. Now, the reason why I bring these verses is because I want you to understand something that it's very vital to this Torah portion. And this is basically that the reason why he said, give me my bride so I can start living with her. That phrase is basically stating to him, to Laban, hey, I need to start having kids. I need kids. Why? Remember, he's 70 something. He's not 21 years old. He's not a youngster. He's not a teenager. He's old. He needs to have that genealogy continue on. That's why he needs to have that, thinking that it's Rachel, but in reality it's Leah, and that's why he's stating these facts. Now let's continue. Almost closing. 31 verse 2 of Yasher. In that evening Laban came to the house, and then Yaakov came there with the people of the feast, and Laban put out all the lights that were in the house. Why did he do that for? Is because apart from being Leah, remember that it was a lot of factors that came to play. Let's continue the verses. Verse 3, 31:3. And Yaakov said to Laban, why are you doing this to us? Laban answered, such is our custom in the land. Now, this happened in the morning when he realized that the daughter was not Rachel, but was Leah. And let's see what happened. Verse 6, and all the people on the feast knew what Laban had done to Jacob. They did not tell Jacob. And all the neighbors came that night to Jacob's house, and they ate and drank and rejoiced and played before Leah's belts and with dances, and answered before Jacob, Chalea, 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 which means they were hinting him. They were hinting Jacob that the person that he thought it was Rachel, it was actually Leah. Chalea, Chalea. They were saying, hey, it's Leah, it's not Rachel. He did not cut it, he did not get it. And there were a lot of factors for it. This feast that they were setting for Jacob was nothing other than drinking feast. Is to have him drunk, to make him drunk. Plus, remember what Laban did? He turned off all the lights. He was drunk, and also he gave his twin daughter to Jacob. Remember, they look alike. It was dark. It was no wonder why he confused thinking that was Rachel. No wonder why he thought he had his wife with him that night. It wasn't so. The word for Hebrew, mishtet means a banquet, a drinking, or a feast. So basically the Hebrew word means, which this word mishtet, which means a drinking party. That was basically it. They just wanted to have him drunk so he wouldn't know what's happening around. Yashar 31 verse 8, and Yahweh heard his words and did not understand the meaning, but he thought that such might be the custom on the land. And the neighbors spoke these words from the front of Jacob during that night, and still didn't cut it. And all the lights of the house of Laban had put out that night. So that means a lot of factors that took place on that night. Verse 10, in the morning when daylight appeared, Jacob turned to his wife and saw, and behold, it was Leah, who had been lying on her bosom. And Jacob said, behold, now I know what the neighbors said last night, Chalea. They said, I did not know. No wonder why they were calling your name, not Rachel's. You see that he didn't actually cut it. That's why he went in the morning and told, why do you deceive me? Knowing that that place was full of deceivers and tricksters. Now let's jump into this. Remember that Leah had a servant which became Silpah, and Rachel also had a servant, which is who? It was Bilhah. Bilhah, from all these 4 women, became the 12 tribes of Israel. Rachel only had 2 kids. I believe Leah had like 5, and so forth. So basically what we see here is the whole generation of the tribes of Israel, which we will see in the next parasha. Now, 31 verse, give me like a minute or two. Genesis 31 verse 41, I've served 14 years for your daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you falsely adjusted my wages tenfold. Now, remember what we talked earlier about the learning Torah for so many years, 32 years, right? And then he went back again to learn Torah for 14 years. What is it that we learn in this, just closing, okay, closing? 14 years was learning in the Torah of Yahweh. But 14 years he stayed in a Gentile's house, and somebody was totally pagan, totally magician. Somebody had nothing to do with Yahweh. What is it that Yaakov is doing with a goy, with somebody who's, had nothing to do with Yahweh, a total secular person? It is because Yahweh wants us to learn Torah, but also to apply it with the world. See, it is not just to learn and gain knowledge. It's about to applying, to put your deeds, your works what it counts. If those two are not counted, what is the point of learning Torah? It's just learning and learning, but you're not applying. You're becoming basically a liar. You're not doing anything. So what is the point of learning Torah? The point of learning Torah is to apply into our lives. And exactly what Yaakov is doing. Just because he was living in a Gentile's house doesn't mean that he was going to become like them. Today, I truly believe that you and I have our families, of course. They serve, New Year's, Halloween, and all these pagan festivals, Christmas, and so forth. But it doesn't mean that we will continue those traditions. No, we have nothing to do with them. All we have to do is the knowledge of Yahweh and His commandments. And it doesn't matter where you are, as long as you continue that path, you will be okay. Yahweh is going to bless you. Yahweh is going to keep you in exactly what He's doing with our father Yaakov. Now, let's end with this. Look at what he's saying right after he got out of Laban's house. Look at what he's saying to his servant to take it to his master Esau. 32 verse 4. With these instructions, here's what they have to say to my master Esau. Your servant Yaakov says, I've been living with Laban and I stay until now. This very verse is acronym for something that is encoded within this verse. The alphanumeric will give you this, basically what he's basically saying. I have observed Yahweh's 613 mitzvot. Now, closing, just once again, Yahweh is basically yelling to all of us. What can we say about this? What can we say about learning Torah all this time? I truly believe that if we continue learning Torah until the day we die, I think we're going to be okay. But it's not, once again, it's not learning Torah. It's also applying it. We have to ask our Creator to give us the strength and the wisdom to apply with our co-workers, with our jobs, our bosses, our friends, our families nowadays. If we don't do that, what is the point of learning Torah? I'm Moreh Rapha'Yah, and I hope that everything will continue with you guys learning the Torah of Yahweh, because that's basically the point of everything. Once again, we'll see you next time, and may Yahweh bless you and keep you.